Welcome to Daily Papers.
Today, we're looking at a paper that asks a really fundamental question about the AI systems we're all using now, things like ChatGPT and other large language models. The question is, are they morally consistent?
Okay, so what does that actually mean, morally consistent?
Well, imagine you ask a friend for advice on a tricky situation. Then, 5 minutes later, you ask them the exact same thing, but you just change a few words, and they give you completely opposite advice. You'd think they were pretty unreliable, right?
Yeah, I'd be completely confused. I wouldn't trust their advice anymore.
Exactly. That's the core idea of this paper, which is called Incoherent by Design, on the moral self-consistency of LLMs. The researchers wanted to know if AI models are like that unreliable friend. If you give them the same ethical dilemma but just rephrase it slightly, do they stick to their principles or do they flip-flop?
And this matters because we're starting to use these AIs for some pretty serious stuff, not just for writing emails or poems. The paper mentions things like content moderation, decision support systems, things that have real moral weight.
Precisely. If an AI is going to help make decisions that affect people's lives, you'd want it to be predictable and principled. The authors have a great term for the opposite of this, epistemic instability. It's a fancy way of saying the AI's reasoning is built on shaky ground.
So, how on earth do you test an AI's moral compass? Do you give it a personality test?
Sort of, but instead of a personality test, they used a few thousand years of moral philosophy. They broke down ethical reasoning into three major schools of thought.
Okay, Philosophy 101 for us then. What are they?
First, you have deontology. This is a rules-based approach. A deontologist would say some actions are just inherently right or wrong no matter the consequences. For example, lying is always wrong, period. It's about sticking to your duties and the rules.
Got it. The rule follower. What's next?
Next is utilitarianism. This one is all about the outcome. The best action is the one that creates the greatest good for the greatest number of people. A utilitarian might say lying is okay if it prevents a huge disaster and saves a lot of lives. The ends justify the means.
Okay, so the results-oriented one. And the third?
The third is virtue ethics. This one is less about rules or outcomes and more about character. It asks, what would a virtuous person do? It focuses on qualities like compassion, courage, and honesty. A virtue ethicist would try to act in a way that reflects the best parts of human character.
Rules, results, and character. Okay, so how did the researchers use these to test the AIs?
This is the clever part. They created a bunch of moral scenarios. For example, one scenario is about whether you should lie to your elderly mother who has dementia to spare her the pain of repeatedly learning that her husband has passed away.
Oh, that's a tough one.
Right. And they didn't just ask the AI, what should I do? They wrote multiple prompts for the same situation. One prompt would be framed with the language of rules and duties, like, by choosing to lie, you are violating the universal duty to always tell the truth. That's a nudge towards deontology.
And I'm guessing another prompt would be framed differently.
Exactly. Another might ask the same thing but focus on maximizing happiness and minimizing pain, which is a utilitarian framing. Or it might focus on what a compassionate person would do, which is virtue ethics. The key thing is the underlying scenario is identical. The only thing that changes is the philosophical flavor of the question.
So the AI should, in theory, give consistent advice when it's prompted with the same philosophical framework, even if the words are slightly different. If it's thinking like a deontologist, it should stick with the rules.
That's the hypothesis. So, were these AI models paragons of digital moral consistency?
Somehow I have a feeling the answer is no.
Not even close. The results were pretty shocking. The researchers found what they call substantial inconsistency. The contradiction rates went as high as 78% in some scenarios.
78%. That's huge. So the AI would say one thing is right, and then in the next prompt, it would completely contradict itself?
Yes, A tiny change in phrasing could make the model flip its entire moral stance. It might agree that lying is a justifiable act of compassion in one response, and in the next, it might argue that the motivations and consequences make it wrong. It was all over the map.
So the AI isn't really reasoning from a stable set of principles. It's more like a philosophical chameleon, just reflecting the specific framing of the question you feed it, even if it contradicts what it just said.
That's a perfect way to put it. And this leads to the paper's biggest takeaway, which is about something called AI alignment.
Right, that's a term you hear a lot. The goal of making AI act in ways that are aligned with human values, to make sure it's safe and beneficial.
Exactly. But this paper argues that we might be skipping a step. How can we align an AI to our values if it can't even align with itself? The authors say its moral commitments are a moving target.
It's like trying to nail Jell-O to a wall. If the AI's own sense of right and wrong shifts with the breeze, how can you anchor it to any consistent human value?
That's the core problem they identify. They argue that demonstrating internal coherence, just being consistent with yourself, is a necessary first step, a prerequisite before we can even have a meaningful conversation about AI alignment.
So, to wrap up, we have these incredibly powerful AI tools that can sound very wise and articulate, but when you poke at their moral reasoning, it turns out to be surprisingly fragile and inconsistent.
That's the long and short of it. The paper concludes that this isn't just some minor technical bug to be patched, it's a foundational challenge. Before we can trust AI with more and more responsibility, we first need to make sure its moral compass actually points in a consistent direction.
A fascinating and slightly unnerving conclusion.